All right, welcome to Sixth and I. My name is Ross Anderson. I'm deputy editor of The Atlantic, and it is my honor and pleasure to introduce my colleague, Arthur Brooks, today. You'll have to forgive me, I might go on for a minute because Arthur's career is really quite fascinating and difficult to describe with any concision. Arthur began as a French hornist in the United States and Spain. Before pivoting to academia, he was a social scientist for 10 years, and then he came here to DC to run the American Enterprise Institute for 10 years, and has since moved over to Harvard Business School and Harvard Kennedy School. And in his spare time, he writes a column on happiness for us, which is a fabulous success, and ultimately has culminated in this book, From Strength to Strength, which is just a remarkable distillation of really hard-won wisdom. I've really enjoyed reading it and am excited to talk about it with Arthur tonight. How this will work is Arthur's going to come up and talk about the book for about a half hour. Then he and I will have a short chat about it, and then we'll take some questions from you. So without further ado, Arthur Brooks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ross. Thanks to all of you. What a delight it is to be with you. Oh, how wonderful it is now that we can be back in person. At some point, I'll be able to see your faces. So delighted. And for those of you who are online, we're thinking of you and sending you our love as well from here, right here in downtown Washington, D.C. at 6th and I. What a delight to have been able to inaugurate this book, From Strength to Strength, and at this historic location as well. Many of you know the reference that this comes from the 84th Psalm, the wonderful blessing, Jewish blessing, Michael El Chayel, which is, I mean, it really means what it sounds like, that you go from strength in your life to strength in lives in which, in so many cases, we don't want to leave the past behind, and we fear the future. This book is basically a personal diary of what I have tried to do as a social scientist to chart out happiness for the rest of my life. I specialize in the science of happiness. It's what I teach at Harvard University. And yet, it's hard to do analysis on yourself and give yourself plans in your own discipline. It's like a surgeon taking out his own appendix. But let me tell you about an experience that I had that made me realize that I needed a plan for my happiness. I've worked very hard in my life, as have you. I consider myself to be something of a striver, working as a musician, later as an academic. I ran an organization here, a think tank here in Washington, D.C. I've spent long hours to be successful in what I do, to create value in the things that I do. But some years ago, I started to feel that I didn't know what the future held. What happens when the party stops? And I had an experience that, quite frankly, changed my life. Sometimes there's a pivotal moment when you hear something and it makes you think about old ideas in new ways. And this is what happened to me on an airplane. Now, when I was the president of this think tank, it sounds like there's a whole lot of thinking in tanks, but really what it is I was traveling around asking people for money as the president of a think tank. I was giving 175 speeches a year and raising $50 million a year. It was like running for the Senate and never getting elected. And one night, I was on a night flight back from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., furiously typing out something on my laptop that seemed completely important, that is now lost to the sands of time. About 11 o'clock at night, it was dark. Most people were sleeping or watching the movie. And I became conscious of a couple behind me having a conversation. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I could tell by their voices that they were probably elderly. It was a man and a woman. I assumed it was a married couple because they were having a very intimate conversation. And that's kind of what got my attention. I couldn't really make out the husband's words. I could hear mumble, mumble, mumble. And then his wife said, "Oh, don't say it would be better if you were dead." Now they had my attention, really. Listening. I hear him mumble a little bit more. She says, "It's not true nobody cares about you anymore. It's not true that you've been forgotten by everybody." This goes on for 20 minutes. And I got kind of a portrait in my head. I'm a behavioral social scientist. So I started thinking, what is it about this man's life? Probably he's disappointed at the opportunities he missed. He probably didn't live up to his potential. He probably didn't do too much as far as he's concerned with his life. We got to Washington, D.C. 45 minutes or an hour later, and the lights went on, and now I'm curious. So I turn around to take a little look just to see the disconsolate man, and it's one of the most famous men in the world. Discretion prevents me divulging his identity, and I wouldn't want to, and that's not the point. My mind was blown, because here's what I thought. I will do a tenth of what this man has done with his life. And I'm thinking that even if I do that tenth, when I achieve that, I'll finally get the satisfaction that I crave as a striver, and I'll enjoy it for the rest of my life. But is it true? Is it possible that that's not how it works at all? Make your goals. Enjoy it. Savor it. Am I going to wind up like that? Am I going to wind up when I'm 85 years old telling my long-suffering wife, Esther, that I wished I were dead? So I'm kind of pondering this, walking up, and we get to the front of the plane, and we're walking past the cockpit, and the pilot is there saying, "Thanks for flying United, folks." And he looks through me like a pane of glass at the man behind me, and he recognizes him immediately, because everybody would. And he said, "Sir, I want you to know that you've been my hero since I was a little boy." And I spun around, and he was beaming with pride, with pleasure, with happiness. And I thought to myself, so which is it? Now or an hour ago? When he was telling his wife that he wished he were dead. And then I had a kind of a selfish thought. Why is that he's suffering so much, and how can I avoid that? And I started a research project to understand the nature of desire, satisfaction, and the trajectory of happiness as people get older. What are the predictors of getting happier as you get older? And how can I change the odds that when I'm 75 and 85, and if God gives me the years 95, that I'll be happier than I am today? And I worked on it for 8 years. Now, it was a folder for me. It was a bunch of notebooks. And my wife was looking at it with me, and it was all kind of brain science-y stuff and social science-y stuff and a bunch of equations, etc. Studies show, that kind of thing. She says, you got to share that. If you think you've cracked the code, if you think that happiness as you get older doesn't have to be left up to chance, and you don't share it, shame on you. So that's what I'm sharing tonight. I'm going to share my research findings with you tonight for about the next 25 minutes or so, and then Ross and I are going to have a conversation, then we're going to hear what's on your mind. But if I do my job, I'm going to try to convince you that your happiness should not be left up to chance. Whether you're 25 or 45 or 65 years old, there's a lot that you can do to remarkably increase the odds that you will be happier at the end of your life than you were earlier as an adult. Now, the first thing I did as I was doing this research is I looked at, how people get happier as they get older. Generally speaking, what happens as you age. My students at the Harvard Business School, they're on average 27 years old. Now I was asking this question. Let's say you're 27, 28, 29, whatever. In 10 years, will you be happier than now or unhappier? All the hands go up for happier. Why? Well, because we're optimists. Humans are naturally optimistic about the future. But there's good reason to be optimistic as well. When you're 38 as opposed to when you're 28, you'll probably have your student loans paid off, you'll probably have a job, your family situation will be figured out. You'll know who you are and where you're going. Good. Now I say, what about 10 years after that? They're like, probably still happier. I say, what about when you're 78? Like, I don't want that. They say, I don't want that. I say, why not? They're like, I don't know. It just doesn't sound good being old. Okay. And then I show them the data. And here's what the data do. From early adulthood until early 50s, people get less happy. Not everybody. As we like to say in economics, your results may vary. But I have data on 500,000 Americans. I have data from every part of the world on top of that, from the Indian subcontinent, from Africa, China, all over Europe. It's all the same. People on average, not dramatic declines, but they gradually decline in their life satisfaction over their adult years, till about early 50s. Why? Lots of explanations. Things like you think you're going to be happier and you're not. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's kind of disappointing. There's some physiological explanations. The most compelling to me is what they call euphemistically family complications. The secret code for teenage kids, especially when people are in their 40s. And I remember this. I remember I had this very distinct, I was doing this data analysis. Nobody knew I was doing it. I was running the company and I was doing my thing. And I remember I was doing some data analysis and showing that people just have this, midlife dip. And I thought, what's the best data in my own life that would suggest why this is? And one of my colleagues came into my office and said, I had 3 teenage kids at the time, right? And my middle son is named Carlos. And my colleague came in and said, have you seen your son Carlos's YouTube channel? And I said, what's that? And then I looked, and I was unhappy. This was contemporaneous, by the way, with Carlos's inadequate performance at school, low grades, chronically low grades. And at the time, just days before, my wife and I had been at the principal's office in a parent-teacher conference that was going particularly poorly. Some of you have experienced this with your kids. And afterward, my wife, who's an optimist, she's from Barcelona, and she says, here's how we got to look at this. At least we know he's not cheating. Yeah. But here's the good news. They move out. And then, not just because of that, life starts to get better. And almost everybody, the most robust finding in my field is that people start getting happier from the early 50s all the way to about 70. Now, happier, really good stuff. But then a weird thing happens. People break up into 2 groups. Around age 70, half the population more or less, starts getting happier and happier all the way to the end. And the other half starts going back down again. So which is which, and how can I be on the top branch? That's my research topic, right? Because the hero on the plane, he was on the downslope. But he had all the demographic characteristics, all the success that you'd think he'd be on the upper slope. That's weird. It turns out it's not weird at all. There's research from psychologists at the University of Texas at Austin that suggests that it's the strivers who tend to be on the downslope. People who've been identified as hard workers, as excellent people, as the kind of people who will achieve anything they put their minds to, they tend to suffer a lot when the party's over. So here's the deal. If you never do anything, you won't know when it's done. But if you do a lot, what goes up must come down. My friends, that's what's called the striver's curse. That you're working for your satisfaction, you're working for your goals, and when you get them, you'll dine out on them for the rest of your life, except you can't, because that's not the way life works. Mother Nature, she doesn't want you to be happy for the rest of your life. Mother Nature wants you to run and run and run and get a little satisfaction and then run some more. Mick Jagger sang, "I can't get no satisfaction." According to Rolling Stone magazine, the 3rd most important rock and roll song in history, written when I was 1 year old. And he's still singing it. And if you'll watch him in a stadium full of boomers, they're exultant. They're enraptured by this. Why? Because it speaks a truth about our lives. Actually, technically, you can get satisfaction. The song should be, "I can't keep no satisfaction." And that's the problem, isn't it? That's the problem for the hero on the plane, and it's your problem, and it's my problem. And when the satisfaction stops, because the success stops, fellow strivers, trouble is in the future. Now, you can see this all over the place. You can see this in famous case studies that people rarely talk about today. One of the most remarkable histories that proves this point, or at least is evidence of this point, is the case of Charles Darwin. If you had a list of the 5 most famous and wonderful scientists who changed the world of science over the past 500 years, if you had the 5 most, Charles Darwin would be on your list. How could he not? And yet, Charles Darwin died at the age of 73, considering his life and career to be a disappointment. He was born on the same day as Abraham Lincoln in 1809, as a matter of fact. He was a relatively unmotivated student, but had his big break. See, his parents were pushing him to the clergy, but all he really loved was science. And at age 22, he got his big break as a scientist. Now, I'm going to come back to the fact that he was a pretty unmotivated, even lazy student, because that plays into the story a little bit later. But at 22, the world was his oyster. He was selected as the naturalist aboard a ship called the Beagle that sailed around the world looking for samples of plants and animals. And over the next 5 years, he never returned home once. He was sending back samples to England to be studied by scientists, and he got more famous by the day. And at 27, when he came home, he was celebrated all over Europe for his samples. But they had no idea what was coming. He dropped an intellectual atomic bomb with his theory of evolution. See, what he had seen convinced him of a new way to understand the natural world that we take for granted today. 27 years old. Unbelievable. He dined out on that and developed his theory of natural selection over the next 30 years or so. Actually, a little bit less, more like 25 years. And in his early 50s, his career stopped. Now, what happened? He had a problem. He actually needed more mathematics than he was capable of performing to continue his research. There was a barrier between what he was doing and what he could do because he needed more mathematics to go forward. He needed more statistics. And furthermore, he needed to read the work of scientists who were not writing in English. And he had never studied his math, and he had neglected his statistics, and he never studied German. And it turns out that a little-known Czech monk named Gregor Mendel had invented a field called genetics that was highly mathematical, and it was just what he needed, and he missed the boat. And his research stopped in his tracks at that moment. For the rest of his life, he wrote 11 more books, but they were derivative, they were unoriginal, he hated them. He wrote to his best friend, "I don't have the capacity to start research, which is the only thing that gives me satisfaction." And at 73, he died disappointed. He was buried at Westminster Abbey. He's revered today. But he thought that he was a disappointment. My friends, he was practically the man on the plane. He could have been the man on the plane. He could be any of us, couldn't he? So what did he do? He spent the last decades of his life raging against his decline, an exercise in futility. And that's what people do all the time when they find that their greatest years are behind them. They rage. As Dylan Thomas once said, rage against the dying of the light, which all it does is makes things worse. So question, what happened? Well, it turns out that we know today what happened. We know what happened to Darwin. We know what happened to the man on the plane. We know what happens to each one of us, which is that we have a beautiful burst of energy and creativity early in our adult lives called fluid intelligence. What is it? It's the kind of genius that you get if you're a striver when you can work harder than others. You can analyze things faster than others. You have an innovative capacity that exceeds others, and you develop it because you're such a hard worker. You know what I'm talking about. It made you what you were early in your adult lives. And that's fantastic. It gets better through your 20s and 30s. Fluid intelligence was identified by a psychologist in London named Raymond Cattell in the late 1960s. And he saw geniuses all over the world, but ordinary people as well, who had this fluid intelligence, who got better at what they did mentally through their 20s and early 30s. But then it slowed down. And he saw that fluid intelligence tended to start to decline by the late 30s. And it plummeted in the 40s, and that's the reason that people felt themselves, even though they were physically fine and mentally clear, they had less acuity, less problem-solving capacity. Their memory was a little bit worse in their 40s and 50s. Sound familiar? And he found that people will often start to rage because they're trying to get their past successes back. But then Raymond Cattell, he had good news, because he discovered that fluid intelligence is not the only kind of intelligence. The really good kind of intelligence comes later, and it's called crystallized intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is not your ability to solve problems faster than others. No. It's not your innovative capacity. It's not your Mark Zuckerberg brain. It's your ability to combine what you know into new ways of thinking and explain it to others. It's your wisdom. Your ability to teach, your ability to explain, your ability to mentor others, to lead teams. That gets better through your 40s. It goes upward in your 50s. It stays high in your 60s and 70s. And if God gives you your marbles, later than that. It's very interesting because subsequently, psychologists like Dean Keith Simonton, the University of California, has looked at this and looked at pure fluid intelligence professions like poets who invent stuff with words. Half of the average poet's work is done at age 40, and the better half is the first half. And then he looks at careers that rely on crystallized intelligence, like historians. They're pure teachers. They have to know a lot, have to know what it means, and explain it to others. Historians have done half their work of their whole life at age 65, and the better half is the second half. Think David McCullough, 88 and going strong. If you're a historian, if you're a teacher, take care of your health, because your best work is coming in your 70s and 80s. So, what does this tell us? Now, you could say some people are fluid and some people are crystallized. No. We're all both. The problem is this. We get stuck on that fluid intelligence curve and we don't want to get off. And when it starts to diminish, we panic and we rage. That's what happened to Charles Darwin. He didn't know he had a crystallized intelligence curve behind it. And what do I have to do? What should the man on the plane have done? Identify the skills on the crystallized intelligence curve and jump. Develop those skills. Go from the innovator to the teacher. Go from Sherlock Holmes to the Dalai Lama. That's what each of us needs to do because we have incredible success that awaits us if we're willing to develop it. So the first strategy that people follow to rage against the dying of the light, that's exactly wrong. What's the right strategy? To jump onto the new curve. And some people do that. I'm going to tell you about somebody, but first I want to tell you about a couple of other things that the happy old people do, because I want to get back to that curve that diverges at age 70, where some people go up and some people go back down. The people who rage, the strivers who rage, they go back down. The ones who find that second curve, they go up. That's the stakes, my friends. If you rage, it's no good. You won't succeed. And unhappiness is your lot. But if you jump, if you're willing to have the faith and the love for others, if you're willing to leave behind the successes of the past and find the new success that can be yours, to have the humility to do something new, you can get on that upper branch. Now, there are other things, and the point of this book is to look at the practices of these people who've gotten happier. I have dozens of case studies of people in this book who actually got happier. What do? I have lots of case studies of people who got unhappier, and I know what they do. But the happier people, what else do they do? A lot of things, but let me tell you two more things that people do to get happier as they age. Number one is they stop adding. They stop adding stuff. They start taking things away. 4 years ago, I was in Taiwan visiting the National Palace Museum, the greatest collection of Chinese art and artifacts in the world. It takes days to go through it. And I knew I couldn't see very much, so I hired a guide who was kind of a specialist in Chinese art, also Western art, and a philosopher to boot. We were looking at an enormous jade statue, 2 tons, carved intricately, incredible. I said, what's the philosophical difference between Chinese art and Western art? And he answered me elliptically, answered me with a question. He said, you as a Westerner, what do you think of when I say, a work of art yet to be started? And I said, I don't know, an empty canvas. He said, correct. See, the difference between Chinese art and Western art is you think that art yet to be started is an empty canvas. We think it's a block of uncarved jade. See, for you, art starts with nothing, filling it up from nothing. We think art already exists inside the jade, and our job is simply to take away the jade that is not the art. That's the philosophical difference. Okay, pretty interesting. But it's also worth pointing out that is that a philosophical difference about how you see your life and how we see success, isn't it? At the beginning of your life, you're a Western artist. Blank canvas. Add stuff. Money. Success. Possessions. Relationships. Prestige. Power. Fame. Right? But in the latter part of your life, guess what? The canvas is full. You can add as many strokes as you want. You won't notice one single thing. Oh, I know what'll make me feel better, said me, age 57, a boat. It's just another stroke on a full canvas, right? You want to know what I need to be really, really successful? I need to change the metaphor. I need to go to the block of jade. I need to start chipping away the things that are not me. Success, happiness comes from finding the true me, and that means jettisoning, the chipping away the detritus that is not Arthur Brooks. And you need to do the same thing too. Here's the thing that people do who are truly happy at the end of their life. They've spent the last decades of their life chipping away. That's very important. So ask yourself this: am I still adding, or have I started subtracting? Here's another practice before I tell you about somebody who truly did it right, and then we get to talk to Ross. One of the interesting things that you find about the people who are on the downslope of their happiness curve, they might have tons of friends. They might be absolutely social. They might say they have dozens of true friends. But are they real friends, or are they deal friends? I was in Aspen at the Aspen Ideas Festival with Ross. And I was actually thinking about this. This is a couple of years ago. This is before the world shut down. And I was sitting under an aspen tree. It's so beautiful. I thought, that's a metaphor for the solitary, strong individual who sits by streams of water, to quote the first psalm. That in the first psalm, the righteous man is like a tree planted by streams of water. Strong, solitary. I don't need anybody else. A friend of mine, a botanist, he clued me in on the truth of the metaphor. See, the aspen tree isn't a solitary creature. It's not even a single plant. The world's largest single organism is actually a stand of aspen trees in Utah called Pando. It's 106 acres. It's 6 million kilograms of timber that is one plant with one root system. All of the trees are simply different shoots off the same root system. What happy older people have in common is the understanding that there is an illusion of individuality. Now, this is an ancient Buddhist understanding that individuality is in point of fact an illusion. But don't be fooled by the idea that this is simply Buddhist teaching. It is reality, that if you want to know the sum of who you are, it is not the sum of achievements, it is the sum of the love in your life. Look to your left and look to the right. In the people in your life. These are your aspen grove. The happiest people work on the root system, not just on the tree. Okay, who did it right? I give you 100 examples of people who raged against the dying of light. Now, let me tell you about my hero. Ross told you I used to make my living as a French horn player. And my favorite composer was Johann Sebastian Bach. You may or may not love classical music, but you know who Johann Sebastian Bach was. 1685 to 1750. Unbelievable productivity. He wrote more than 1,000 compositions for all musical combinations of instruments, from orchestra to chorus to keyboard to chamber music. He wrote cantatas for every Sunday in the liturgical year. They fell off his pen. The most celebrated composer of the high Baroque of his time. By the way, you want to know how productive he was? He had 20 kids. And, it's interesting because there was nothing that could hold him back except the end of his fluid intelligence curve. See, his career as an innovator stopped at 50. Sound familiar? Just like Darwin. Why? Because musical styles passed him by. And who ushered in those musical styles? Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, his own son, changed musical styles toward the classical style of music and rendered the high Baroque as obsolete as disco is today. And overnight, he went from the most celebrated composer, innovative composer, to a has-been, to a yesteryear memory. So what did he do? Rage? Rage against his son? Rage against the fans? Rage against the commissions that were no longer rolling in? No. He repotted himself from innovator to the most beloved teacher of his time. Now, was he as famous? No. Was he as rich? No. But students sought him out to learn the techniques of the high Baroque so that they could be better educated as composers, writing in the new style. And he loved it. He was revered, and he had love in his life, and he understood himself as truly successful in this new way of making his living. He also, by the way, dedicated himself to writing textbooks. But his textbooks were examples of the High Baroque, thinking that I will write these things down for posterity. The last major composition from Johann Sebastian Bach was called Die Kunst der Fuge, the art of fugue, which is a collection of fugues and canons. Nobody wanted to hear fugues and canons, but he thought, someday, perhaps, somebody will want to hear this. Well, 100 years after Johann Sebastian Bach died, Felix Mendelssohn, another composer, found the manuscript, blew off the dust, played it for his friends, and said, this is genius. And since then, Bach is the composer that we know today. Today, people play that text as concert music. Imagine writing a textbook so beautiful that people read it as literature. My textbooks are not that beautiful, I will tell you. And they won't be 100 years after I die either, I'm quite sure. But Bach was different. See, when he died, he was obscure. Mozart one time said, Bach is the father, we are the children. He was referring to Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, the son. It wasn't until a century later that he came back. But how did he die? He died beloved. He died respected. He died surrounded by his many children and his even greater number of grandchildren, and surrounded by the students that he had fulfilled. And he felt beloved. He loved God. He loved his family. And he felt truly successful because he was successful in the right way. What did he do? He did not rage. Lesson number 1. Number 2, he found his second curve. That's lesson 2. Number 3, he chipped away the parts of his life that were extraneous, the fame, the commissions, the prestige. And number 4, he cultivated his root system. Those, my friends, are 4 of the lessons on how each of us can go from strength to strength. That's my strategic plan. That's what I offer up to you with my love. May you go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Oh, Arthur, that was fantastic.
Thank you, Ross.
I prepared all these questions, and now I just want to know who's the guy on the plane.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. And I have this thing about not getting sued. So
Surely he's dead now. There's a hint. All right, we got it. Look, I thought I'd get us off to kind of a properly sunny start by talking about death. I recently ordered and received this work of art by this Belgian artist, a guy named Dries de Porter, and it's this personalized bit of art. It's like a very simple digital clock. Like, you can see the circuit board on it. It's got my name etched into the back, and programmed into it is my life expectancy based on the World Health Organization, and it constantly displays a percentage of my life that I've already lived. Yeah. So every morning you sort of like wake up and you have this digital memento mori kind of like staring you in the face, and it's friends of mine were telling me like, hey Ross, this is like pretty morbid, and so I was vindicated when I read your book. Yeah. And your book really encourages all of us to kind of stare into the abyss like really regularly and cheerfully. And so I was wondered if you could just sort of tell us a little bit about that, how that's been for you, thinking about death and how it's shaped your perspective.
For sure. And there's nothing new about the idea of meditating on your own death. On the contrary, ancient philosophical traditions from the West to the East have suggested this, and it sounds like it's some way to be in touch with reality, some existential technique to make us deeper. It's a way to beat fear. If you go to a psychotherapist and say, I'm morbidly afraid of flying, your psychotherapist will recommend that you become exposed to airplanes. Yeah. I'm afraid of snakes. She'll show you pictures of snakes. Why? Because exposure makes things normal, and normal things are not scary. Now, most of you, according to the data, are not really afraid of dying. Only 20% of Americans have thanatophobia, which is the morbid fear, ironically I use that language, of death. 80% are not. But we're all afraid of death. That means there's something that we don't want to end that we consider central to our lives, which is a form of the fear of death. You know what I'm afraid of? Becoming irrelevant. I'm afraid of failure. Strivers are all afraid of failure. My students at Harvard, they're super afraid of failure. And so failing is a form of death for them. So what do? You meditate on that thing. It's interesting that the ancient philosophers from Lao Tzu to St. John the Apostle say that fear and love are opposites. Love and hatred are opposites. Love and fear are opposites. And so if you want to crowd out fear in your life, you need more love in your life. And to do that, you need to make fear ordinary. You need to make fear something that, the object of your fear, something that simply is as ordinary as the chair I'm sitting on here. Because guess what? You're going to die. Guess what? You are going to become irrelevant. Guess what? You're going to be forgotten. It's the most normal thing ever. If you weren't, that's the scary thing. And so how do you do it? There's a thing called the Maranasati meditation in Buddhism, and Theravada Buddhism, and the Southern Tier Buddhism. You see pictures and photos in Buddhist monasteries, I've seen them in Thailand, in which you have a series of photos of cadavers in various states of decay. It looks horrible. It's horrible. And then you realize that the monks are meditating on each one of these pictures, saying, that is me, and that is me, and that is me, until they're no longer afraid of the inevitable reality that is such that then, only then can they be alive. And so I recommend, think about your fear. Think about the thing that's holding you back. That's your death fear. Make a 9-part meditation in which you imagine these things and meditate on them daily, and you will be free.
One of the recurrent themes in your book, which you sort of touched on as the kind of grace note of your talk tonight, is this kind of real emphasis on human connection and successful people building these networks of people who they genuinely love and are connected to. And one of the things that I found really counterintuitive in your book, which I'd love if you would speak to, is that leaders of organizations, people that we imagine to be just right at the center of these dense networks of people surrounded by others, are in fact often quite lonely. Talk about why that is.
It's interesting because I talk about this a lot with my students. And many of my students at the Harvard Business School are intensely lonely. They're surrounded constantly by their peers. But when they come into the Harvard Business School, they're encouraged to spend every free moment connecting with others, to create a network of connections. But these are just deal friends. They're just deal friends. They're not encouraged to make real friendships. If you have deal friends, no matter how many that you have, you will be lonely. You know the difference. I don't have to define the difference between real friends and deal friends, but people go through life just having more and more deal friends and wonder why they're so lonely. Leaders in particular, they never have a down moment. They're surrounded by people constantly, and yet there's nobody on whom they can rely. Even their spouse will become a deal friend. This is a huge problem. So this is the question. If you're going to make your aspen grove on the basis of the roots and not the individual trees, make sure those roots are healthy. What I talk about in the book, I have a whole chapter on friendship, because friendship is so critical. One of the most interesting things that I've done in my own research is showing that the basis of a successful marriage is not passion, it's friendship. It really is. A deep, real friendship is the basis of every relationship. It's interesting. So the beginning, the ignition of romantic life is based on dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter, the neuromodulator of excitement, of focus. And dopamine is at the basis of passionate love. But sooner or later, the tide's going to go out. And there better be something left on the beach. And that's companionate love. And companionate love still has plenty of passion in it, I hope in all of your lives and mine. But the basis of it has to be friendship. Good marriages are based on friendship. Good lives are based on friendship.
And how have you, as someone who's sort of been a part and even led, various elite institutions, such that you can't always know who's your deal friend and who's your real friend. How do you distinguish between the two and know where to invest your energy?
Deal friends are the people who are. It's interesting. So Aristotle uses this distinction between telic and atelic activities. And he says the true happiness comes from atelic activities. Now, telic comes from the telos, the purpose of something. Atelic activities, which bring true happiness, they don't really have a purpose except to be as an intrinsic end in itself. Why do people actually love baseball? Because it's useless. And so this is the nature of a true friendship. A true friendship is cosmically useless. My best friends are my useless friends. They're not worthless. They're useless. I have a friend I love. His name is Frank. He lives in Atlanta. And we've done a little bit of business together, and he sits on my board, and I sit on his board. whatever. We're only doing that as a pretext. He's useless to me. I just love him. And he wants me to be happy and holy. That's it. He just wills my good. And if I were in crisis, I could call him at 2 a.m. You can't call a deal friend at 2 a.m. They're like, why are you calling me? That's a kind of a special, almost metaphysical uselessness, and that's the key tell. Not the people who need you for work and prosperity, and not the people that you need to succeed in money and power and fame. They're the people where if they had nothing to give you, you would still love them and they would still love you.
In the book you talk a lot about how in order to move from this period of our lives where we're drawing on fluid intelligence into this crystallized intelligence period, that you have to kind of kick your success addiction. And I wondered if for you that was kind of a binary like on-off switch, or if you've had relapses.
Yeah. So success addiction, it's there's a lot of literature on the neuroscience and social science of addiction. And it's a huge literature because it's such a big problem in our society. And there's some interesting things that you find. I mean, some of it is things that we all know, of course. But one of the most interesting things, as far as I'm concerned, about all addictions is they tend to be a form of self-medication for something that bothers us about ourselves, a lack that we have. So you find, for example, I'll just give you one example, that if you have a touch of attention deficit, you will be the kid in your friend group at age 13 who immediately gets addicted to cigarettes. Because nicotine draws dopamine to the prefrontal cortex, giving you the focus that other people have and that you lack and that bothers you. You have a sense of the things that you lack, and there are chemicals or activities that bring them to you, and you get addicted to them. The same thing is true, and one of the reasons that alcohol misuse disorder tends to be most frequent among high socioeconomic status, high income men in the United States. It's not the down and outs, no. It's people who earn above average income and have above average education. Why? Because those in this group that tend toward anxiety, they go to the most frequent and easy to administer drug that turns anxiety off like a switch. And now what about the success addiction? Often manifests itself in workaholism. Are you a self-objectifier? Were you set up to succeed by your parents? Are you homo economicus? Are you an excellent work machine because you want to live up to your own expectations, the expectations of everybody as a child who told you that you were better than others, that you had more talent than others, that you were smarter than others? You know who you are. You know who we are. We know who we are. And the truth of that is that you internalize that self-objectification and you feed it. And the dopamine that you get from it is part of the reward for the success after the success. We talk in my profession about the hedonic treadmill. That simply means the treadmill of feeling. And it really refers to hitting the dopamine lever like a monkey on cocaine. Hit the lever and hit the lever. And it's never good enough because remember, you can't keep no satisfaction. And you're going to hit the lever of success again and again and again, and then you have to hit it faster. And pretty soon, there's an evil guy in the corner of the gym turning up your hedonic treadmill. And after 10 or 15 years, you realize you're not running from ambition anymore. You're running out of fear. Because if you stop on a treadmill, you become a hilarious internet meme of somebody who just face planted on the back of a treadmill. That's the success addict, and I'm guilty. I come before you today Success Addicts Anonymous. One of the reasons I wrote this book is I want off the wheel. I need peace. I need happiness. I don't need to hit the lever over and over and over again, and neither do you. This helps. This really helps to actually recognize it, because when you're managed by your addiction, there's not much that you can do, but when you make it metacognitive and you understand it, it moves into your prefrontal cortex and you can manage it. And I am managing it. But sometimes I fail. This week I have a book that came out. Yeah. And by the way, my team, my beloved book team, they're here and they made it colossally, sensationally, fantastically successful. Thank you. Mwah. Thank you. But I'm back on the treadmill. And it turns out that when you hit that little thing that says refresh on Amazon, you keep getting to see how it ranks. I'm the cocaine monkey again this week, my friends. So pray for me.
Sorry to have brought that up.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I was reading your book, and I kept running into these notions of balance and detachment, and I started sort of congratulating myself, you know, secretly, like, oh, you know, there's some Eastern influence here. And then it comes out explicitly, and you're like, have a whole chapter on the Buddha, and I didn't feel so clever. But what I wanted to ask you about is, you know, I know you've had a relationship with the Dalai Lama, and, you know, seeing this issue, seeing happiness from kind of both sides,
Right.
would you describe the kind of problem that your book is looking to solve as a sort of particularly Western affliction?
I actually wouldn't, and one of the reasons perhaps I would have before I started spending a lot of time in Dharamsala with His Holiness, and actually spending a lot of time in India. And before that, I spent time in China. Since I've had a relationship with the Dalai Lama, I've been spending considerably less time in China. But I go to India a lot, you know, and you know this is a very religious place, and very enlightened in so many ways. But I see people busting their pick, just like us. I see the dopamine problems and the success addiction and the high standards of parents that subject their students to these, their children to these addictions all over the world. I think this is a human problem. Now, different places and different cultures have different ways to combat it, but I'm telling you, I've seen the children of immigrants in this country who suffer every bit as much as me times 2. And the reason is because they can't quite live up to the standards, and even after their parents are long dead, they're still trying to live up to those standards. We all need these ideas. Now, the Buddha, the Vedic, the suttas of ancient tradition, the ancient Judaic teachings, the New Testament, St. Thomas Aquinas, Averroes, Maimonides. Look, they all can help us. All of these things can help us because they're dealing with these truisms of what it means to walk on earth. The fact that your brain says, if you do this, you will be happy. But your brain is lying to you. And only you can actually manage these feelings as opposed to requiring that you try to find happiness as they manage you.
I want to invite the audience to come to these microphones and ask some questions right after this next one. So if you want to start lining up, we're just going to alternate between left and right after this last one.
Okay.
But I thought I'd close with a fun one, at least fun for me. You know, all of us really, like, part of friendships, you know, spousal or otherwise, is sort of sitting around a dinner table and thinking about your peer group and sort of who is handling these transitions you're describing better than others. You know, we can't do that because we're friends with different people
Right.
Up here, but there are certain people in public life that we're watching go through these transitions.
For sure.
And so I sort of assembled a short list, and I wondered if we could kind of speed round through it, and you could give us your impressions on the fly.
Man, really? So it looks like we're out of time. And,
Jeff Bezos.
Jeff Bezos is a good example of somebody who I don't know whether by nature or by nurture actually went from one curve to the other. Look, early on in his career, he was a pure innovator. I mean, a true innovative genius, unbelievable. And later in his career, he takes one decision a day. He's a coaching leader. He talks all the time about how, you know, wise ideas and the best ideas culled from other people. He actually wound up, weirdly, on his crystallized intelligence curve. This is somebody, I think, who may have cracked the code.
Feel free to mix in impressions about their personal life as well.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's all good, too. Yeah.
Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan is interesting, and I don't quite know well enough. The comeback is a dicey matter. You know, when people are actually trying to come back in one sport or the other, ordinarily what it means is there's a little stub of the fluid intelligence. There's a little bit of a vestige, kind of a phantom itch that they have. And so I have to say that when Michael Jordan was leaving but not leaving, sort of the Liza Minnelli phenomenon of leaving but not leaving, retiring but not retiring, that reminded me an awful lot of somebody who was pining for the fluid intelligence curve.
Yeah, you saw, I mean, later in his Hall of Fame speech, I mean, here's a guy who's just endlessly celebrated, and he was completely bitter. Like, used the whole things to, like, go through all these resentments.
Raging against the dying of the light, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to say when you don't know somebody exactly what that is, but it has all the hallmarks, doesn't it?
Ellen DeGeneres.
Ellen DeGeneres is interesting because she's actually gone from the work that she did as an incredibly innovative comedian to somebody who is putting together a program that combines the ideas of other people in very creative ways. I'd have to say that Ellen DeGeneres is an example of somebody who seems on the outside to have gone from strength to strength.
All right, I'll give you one more, and then we'll take some audience questions here. Barack Obama.
I admire Barack Obama. I think we probably all do. He's the story of America, the story that we all want to believe about America, isn't he? I don't know what he's up to.
Yeah.
I actually don't know what he's up to, but it seems to me
good.
that as he's, what's that?
Maybe that's good.
Perhaps that is good. Perhaps that he's actually retired from the limelight, and he's teaching others. He's spreading his wisdom. If he came, you know, what I think it would be great for Barack Obama to do is to come and join me as a professor at the Kennedy School.
I think you mean join us at the Atlantic.
Exactly right. Where together we can plumb the depths of our crystallized intelligence. Exactly
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, we've got our first question right here.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with this notion of chipping away.
Yeah.
To me, it implies less. So I'm 78 years old. I was retired full-time from the practice of law a couple of years ago, and I was actually amazed at how easy it was to let go when I finally did. But my whole gang of guys who have retired or almost fully retired are busy as hell. They're playing tennis, and they're reading, and they're doing crosswords, and they're coming to see Arthur Brooks, and they're
That's a waste of time.
Yeah. So my calendar is just full of stuff. This is my second talk today.
It's great.
So what does...
I'm the second talk. I'm the second talk, folks.
Yeah.
It's like I'm the seconds.
Right.
Think about it, yeah.
I did the Rosenwald Schools lecture on Zoom today. So what is chipping away? Is chipping away mean less? What does it mean?
So it's a good question, of course. Effectively what it is, it's a good question. And effectively what it is this. So St. Thomas Aquinas writes in the Summa Theologica that there are 4 idols in life. The things that we think will bring satisfaction, that we chase and chase and chase. They're money, power, pleasure, and fame. They never bring that satisfaction, and those are the things to chip away. Money, power, pleasure, and honor. What do we need to replace them with? What are you replacing them with? Faith?
Crossword puzzle.
My guess is what you're really replacing them with is the relationships in your life, the love in your life, the things that can cultivate your interests, and especially that you enjoy with a lot of other people, the people that you care about the most. This is the sine qua non of aging excellence. Faith, family, friendship, and the work that you do that serves other people. Those are the right ambitions. You know, the key thing is that the Dalai Lama always talks about that the secret to lasting satisfaction is not to get what you want, but to want what you have. And that means getting rid of these extraneous things, of the true wants, the meritorious wants, the things that will bring true and lasting satisfaction. And that's faith, family, faith or philosophical life for that matter. It doesn't have to be my particular traditional religious faith, but family life, friendship, real friendship, and serving other people. That's really what it comes down to.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, and congratulations. This man's cracked the code.
Thank you very much, and I think I speak for all saying this was a tremendous presentation tonight. So
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
And I was stimulated by your talk about real and deal friendship. And is real friendship a necessity, an imperative for success? And I cite the example, 2 of the most consequential presidents of the 20th century. Franklin D. Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan were both people who were known for getting others to do things for them throughout their careers, and yet, based on all the evidence, never truly grew close to other people as close friends. So, and yet, no one, I think, would argue that either was not a successful president and someone who changed America and the world. Are real friends a necessity for greatness? Success.
Thank you for that. The answer to that, according to both historical principle but the empirical regularity, is that deal friends will make you worldly successful, and real friends will make you truly happy. That's the difference. I don't know whether Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a happy man, or Ronald Reagan for that matter. However, there's one thing that's worth pointing out. He had one true, real friend. His true best friend was Nancy Reagan. It's just completely unambiguous that she knew everything. He loved her more than anybody else. It was his true friend. Now, it's interesting that all of the data show that one of the hallmarks of happiness, there's a great study that has been undertaken over the last 80 years at Harvard called the Harvard Study of Adult Development that has followed a huge sample of people over 80 years. It's a crystal ball into how they lived their lives and how they wound up. And it's also followed their kids and grandkids and spouses, and it's incredible. It's a gold mine of data. And what they find is the single most important, my column this morning in our magazine was about the success practices based on that database. And some of them are pretty obvious, don't drink too much. Some of them are learn how to manage your stress, et cetera, et cetera. But the single most important one of all is that happiness is love, and the best way to get it is a permanent, stable, romantic partnership. But that permanent, stable, romantic partnership has to be with your best friend. It has to be with your companionate love. It has to be on the basis of real friendship is where that comes around. And I strongly suspect that Ronald Reagan had that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hey, let me just add my gratitude for your time and all the effort that went into this book.
Thank you.
So I haven't read the book. I look forward to doing that.
I'm looking forward to reading it too. Yeah, I've heard it's good. Yeah.
So you talk about these two curves, but are you inferring, though, that, because you really talk about that in terms of how people behave and what's a strategy to maintain happiness later in life, but is the implication of that you could take those lessons or ought to take those lessons and put them into the earlier phase of your life? I mean, because you do have this phase where we're all, or whatever. I'm in that phase where it's like all those things.
You're fluid, man. I mean, you're
hitting the button, looking for.
You're probably early. You're mid-30s, right?
Bless your heart. Thank you.
We bald guys got to stick together.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah.
But is that the takeaway? I mean,
yeah. Look, the whole point of this is that there's a natural cadence to life. That you are good at some things naturally early and some things good later. But the important piece of information for young people is you got to start making deposits. You got to start putting together your happiness 401k. And part of that is getting ready to change and being willing to change when the time comes. Invest now in your fluid intelligence curve. Absolutely. Absolutely. But when it comes time to jump with both feet. That's what the investment is really all about. Now, there's other things that we should do when we're early on. We should have real friendships. We should pursue the spiritual path. These are other, we should start trying to break the success addiction. There are things that we should do starting early on, but a proper understanding of the cadence of our lives, the knowledge, the metacognitive ability to understand that we will change, that is super important, and I try to impress that upon my students. I say, look, you're screaming up your fluid intelligence curve, folks, and you're going to come right back down. Get ready to jump. Get ready to get into a liminal state. Get ready for the cosmic of insecurity that actually comes from going from one to the other, and start celebrating and start thinking about, start mentalizing yourself right now. And that turns out to be the key skill that people need when they're nice and young, like you.
Can I just
follow up for sure?
Yes. So, in your research, and I forget the language you just used to describe the fluid.
Yeah.
Because you often make trade-offs.
Yeah.
As you're raising a family, you may not, invest in your friendships as much. Did your research find that investing in career, in success, is a critical part of having a full and happy life, as opposed to spending your whole life focused on more exclusively the tree analogy, the root system?
So that's a good question, and let me answer it in terms of having basically a balanced portfolio. What the happiest people have at any point in life is that they have a balance, that the habits come in. You can boil the ocean of tens of thousands of studies on this. The habits of people that are happy at any point in life is they have a balance between faith, family, friends, and work. And one of the things that unhappy people have in common is they over-invest, they over-index on one of those things, and it's always work. That's what I find. So when I'm talking to ambitious people, I never have to say, you need to work longer hours. Because why? They're taking that 14th hour at work instead of the first hour with their kids because they're super good at it and they're rewarded and they're hitting the lever. They're hitting the lever over and over and over again. So it is not true that you should not be ambitious. It is not true that you shouldn't work hard, but that's not the problem. When I say, are you paying attention every day to your spiritual philosophical life, to your family life, to your friendships? I don't have to ask if you're going to work. Of course you're going to work. You're a striver. Of course you're going to work. But the answer is this, to all the other questions. Did you invest in that category or not? If the answer is no, examine your conscience. Because at the end of the day, you still will work hard, and you can take a little chip out of the work category and start putting it in the other ones, and you need to invest in a balanced portfolio at every point in life. Thank you for that.
You were talking about a moment in our journey of life when you said the happiness comes when our children leave us.
It's a coincidence. Yeah.
At the same time, you spent quite a bit of your discussion today emphasizing the glory of aspen trees.
Yeah.
Where this is the root system that brings so many children.
Yeah.
And I lost a husband at the aspen tree grove in Colorado a year ago. I know how they grow. I want to understand, given the wisdom that you have, what really brings joy?
So the question is, thank you, go ahead.
No, I wonder how the way you're framing it, joy coming from when your children leave, is it truly a Western cultural influence? And I wonder how spending time with Dalai Lama and in India and other cultures, whether you've revisited that belief, and what would you share with us as the audience in terms of true wisdom to achieve strength and to achieve empowerment and to be able to be the engines of good deeds? Because I feel that's what you're teaching us to do. So what would you say to that?
Thank you so much for that. And it gives me an opportunity. I mean, it's partly lighthearted when I talk about this. The truth of the matter is that happiness, which many people define as a feeling, isn't. Just as the smell of the Thanksgiving turkey is not your Thanksgiving dinner. It's a result of it. It's a signal of it. Feelings are a signal of happiness. Happiness is really, and this is based on the people who are happy, they have three big characteristics in abundance. They have enjoyment, they have satisfaction, and they have purpose. The reason that people have a tendency to report lower levels of well-being when their kids are adolescents is not actually because they're happy in some fulsome sense. It's because their enjoyment is lower, even though their meaning is higher. And this really gets at this when you say, where's the joy? The joy is mostly from meaning and purpose. Joy loads more, in most people's conception, on meaning and purpose. And you know what meaning and purpose they require? They're the most paradoxical part of happiness, because meaning and purpose require suffering. They require pain. They require loss. The biggest mistake that we can make in trying to be happy by avoiding unhappiness is that in avoiding unhappiness, we will avoid meaning in our lives. And in so doing, we will be avoiding one of the most important sources of happiness. When I look back on the time when the sleepless nights with my adolescent kids, I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about them. I learned a lot about my resiliency through the fear that I actually had about how things might turn out. Did I have enjoyment that was high? Mm-mm. Did I have meaning that was deep? Oh, yeah. And that's really what life's all about, isn't it? It's having every experience. It's having the pains, the good, the bad, all of it. Taking it all, accepting it all, saying, thank you for it all. You allow me to clarify actually what we're seeing on this trajectory of happiness that appears to sink and then rise and go in a fork at the end. It's deeper than just what people are saying about how happy I am right now. Because happiness at the end of the day has these dimensions that are transcendental and go beyond these categories. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take this last question, but then afterwards, for those of you who are microphone shy, Arthur has graciously volunteered to stick around and chat with anyone who wants to right here in front of the stage. So, sir, take us home.
Just 2 weeks ago, your peer in this amazing thought leadership awakening we're living in, Daniel Pink, sat in that very chair talking about his book, The Power of Regret.
Yeah.
The longer someone lives, the more life experience they have, one can imagine they're racking up regrets along the way. What did your research show you about how stacked up regrets affect happiness on the second part of your life?
It's
I'm actually going to add to that and
Yeah.
ask if you would share your largest regret.
I will share my largest regret. And it's about relationships, which is a category of regret that Daniel Pink talks about in his wonderful book. Some of you read that talk. And it's basically this. As a young man, I left home permanently. I mean, I went to college, but I flunked out of college. Or, dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs at this point. And I went on the road as a musician. I played, my parents called it my gap decade. And I was off the payroll. I moved 3,000 miles away from my family. I talked to my family once a month for years. And I always thought to myself, I want to know my parents better. My father was a brilliant man. He was a biostatistician. My mother was an artist of some renown in the Pacific Northwest. They were creative people. They were interesting people. But we had a cordial relationship. Unfreighted, unproblematic. But I didn't really know them, and they didn't really know me. And it was my fault. Then I moved to Spain. And I talked to them every couple of months. And I saw them every couple of years. And I thought to myself, nah, this has got to end. But they're not old, so it will sooner or later. And they died. My dad died at 66. By that point, my mother was profoundly demented. And she died at 73. And there was no chance left. I missed the opportunity. And I thought about it, and it bothered me for a long time. It bothered me because it was, as they say in baseball, an unforced error. But then I realized something. I do have a second chance. I have adult children now. I get a second chance, my friends. I have children who are 23 and 21 and 18, and I talk to them every single day, whether they like it or not. I'm telling you, my little girl, she's 18 years old. She's a freshman in college in Spain. I talk to her every single day. My middle son, Carlos, he's an active duty forward deployed combat Marine. I talk to him every day when he's not deployed and not in a secret location. My oldest son is engaged to get married, and I got him living with me right now. What a joy. The big messy chick has come back to the nest. And I tell you, I'm redeeming my greatest regret. And this is Daniel Pink's point, the important point of this. If I basically said, no regrets, man, no regrets, I wouldn't have learned. And if I hadn't have learned, I wouldn't have altered my relationship with my own adult children. I could not have redeemed that, and I would not have become transcendent in the new relationship that I got. I need that regret to have learned. Thank God I have that regret. But I'm not burdened by it anymore either, because I forgave myself. I didn't give myself a life sentence for my insensitivity toward the people who raised me, the wonderful people who raised me. It was just an error. I was just a young man. And I dedicate my wonderful relationship with my adult kids to my wonderful parents. Thank you for that.
Arthur, thank you. This is wonderful. I hope you all buy this book. It's a fantastic book. This is great, man.
Thank you. Great job.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you so much to Arthur Brooks and Ross Anderson. Books are for sale in the lobby. They are signed, and exits are to my right, as well as to the main sanctuary door where you entered. Thanks. Good night.